Let me read one of my favorite books called A Face to the World by Laura Cumming. This is a book about painting, particularly self-portrait. It is a wonderful book. When I bought it, I learned quite a lot. It is very literary in the sense that it is a combination of beautiful writing and literature quotations or stories, etc. So it is not just a arts book. Okay, let me read the preface. Charles Dickens once said that he lived in a perpetual dread of any sudden new discovery about Shakespeare. The revelation of a letter, an image, a biographical fact, anything that might disturb his life's fine mystery. The little that was known was dismaying enough, that the universal genius had a hard head for business and thought nothing of pursuing the tiniest of debts through the course, that the author of the tragedies also found time to pester the government about the state of the roads around Stratford. At least, nobody really knew what Shakespeare looked like. To Dickens's relief, there was no face. To delusion the faithful, since not one of the portraits for which claims of authenticity were so often published in Victoria times was made by an artist known to have met him. The roughed bust of a bard at Stratford, the Charles the Candle's dandy with his golden earring, these could be regarded as false idols for a credulous population. Dickens despised the public's need for a face and could not contain his scorn when asked to help fund a statue of Shakespeare. He replied by saying that he would not contribute a farthing for a likeness because the work of Shakespeare must be the only lasting monument. Nothing else, not a portrait or a statue. The ideal Shakespeare for Dickens is the Shakespeare we have, a genius and an absolute blank, immortal, invisible, unimaginably wise, something like a God the Almighty. This is exactly the comparison that occurs to George Louis Borges in Everything and Nothing. His parable of Shakespeare's extraordinarily elusiveness as an actual person. Borges, imagine a conversation at the purely gates between the two great creators in which Shakespeare, having been so many other people in his art, appeals to God to let him be just one man at last. But God offers not the slightest hope. I too have no self. I dreamed the world as you dreamed your work, my Shakespeare. And among the shapes of my dream are you, who like me are many men and none, and no one. Shakespeare has no unified self, no single entity, no single identity, and certainly no fixed appearance. In fact, he's too great to have been visible at all. Borges described him as a hallucination, a dream dreamed by nobody, a cloud of ethereal vapor. For all those who would prefer Shakespeare to remain invisible, many more long for a definitive face, perhaps hoping to find a trace of a character in its expression, or to feel a direct line of communication opening before them, or just for the simple and irreducible fascination of knowing what Shakespeare looked like. This curiosity is not to be despised. You do not have to believe, like Schopenhauer, that the outer man is a picture of the inner, or that the face is a manifestation of the soul. From the infant's ability to read two dots and a dash as the primitive features barely before its eyes can focus, to the instinctive imagining of an unseen correspondent or the speaker on the other end of the line. From our mass observation of a passers-by in the street to the rage for Facebook, a compulsion to look at our fellow beings unites us. How can one not take an interest in faces, real or represented? It is almost a test of human solidarity. That's interesting. A compulsion that we human beings have to look at our fellow is to look at a face. How can one not take an interest in faces, real or represented? It is almost a test of human solidarity. Degas told Sicard he always took an omnibus across Paris because he could never see enough people from inside a closed carriage. We were created to look at one another, won't we? Yet the strain of antipathy towards portraiture that runs in and out of a history that once demoted it well below battle scenes or bathing nymphs, that derides it as a face painting and mistrusts its version of the truth, has something to do with faces and not just pictures. For faces do not always fit. People do not look as they should. Appearances may create a spurious sense of intimacy when they look right for the part. This is just how one imagined for a famous person, or sudden and dismaying estrangement when they don't. Delacroix, passionate in painting, has a prim little toothbrush moustache. Stravinsky is a lugubrious bureaucrat. Rodhenko, his aim so spiritual, is a heavy lug in blue-tinted glasses. Almost everyone would prefer a better Shakespeare than the egghead of the first folio's engraving, which Ben Jonson, having known the original, warningly endorsed on the opposite page. And nobody can stomach the portrait dot with his cushion and quill commemorated in the bust at Stratford. If Shakespeare made us more fully human to ourselves, then surely he should look more like some other great soul. Shakespeare should look more like a Rembrandt. Or more like a Rembrandt's self-portrait, to be precise, not Rembrandt as he might have looked to a fellow artist. Another painter could have settled a few pedantic questions about Rembrandt's actual appearance, the color of his eyes and hair, the shape of his nose, and so on, about which he is notoriously cavalier and inconsistent. But no matter how accurate such a portrait might have been, it could never give the sense of an inner mutability, of a personality altered daily by experience, never fixed, ever changing, that makes the Rembrandt of the self-portraits so human, so Shakespearean. Of course, it could be argued that self-portraits involve obvious conflicts of interest, that they may be less true to appearances than portraits. But they are not just portraits, for all that art history often treats them as a subject, and they often specialize in other kinds of truths. Artists have portrayed themselves improbably as wounded, starving or conscious unconscious beneath a tree. As a baby being born, or a severed head dripping blood, as younger or older or even of the opposite sex. We clearly do not consult self-portraits for documentary evidence. But no matter how fanciful, flattering, or deceitful the image, it will always reveal something deep and incontrovertible and distinct from a portrait, namely this special class of truth, this pressure from within that determines what appears as art we thought, that leaves its trace in every self-portrait. In Rembrandt's case, it might be the desire to appear head in air when most down and out, or the urge to portray oneself as laughing in the dark or all alone in the world. The pose could be an outright lie, for all we know, but the fiction always carries its own truth, the truth of how the artist hopes to be seen and known, how he wishes to represent himself. Had Shakespeare been able to paint as he wrote, had Shakespeare left a self-portrait, not even Dickens could have denied its transcendent value. This book, like many, has its origins in childhood. Ill in bed, I was given what its owner called a portable museum, dozens of postcards of old masters in a shoebox. Among the many pictures of people were some of that stood apart, having that intensity about the eyes that even a child recognizes as a sign of a self-portrait. Two stayed out of the box, probably never given back, and as mysterious to me now as they were then. Both appear in this book. Jacques Louis David was a puzzling presence because he appeared puzzled himself, discomforting because he seemed evident discomfort. I could not have said that what was wrong with him, or even what was odd about the picture, except that the artist seemed to be, in some peculiar sense, convalescent, which was exactly how I imagined my state. Oh, did I learn that from him? The painting drew me in so forcefully with its image of a man who seems strange even to himself, that it gave me a sudden insight into how it might feel to be perplexed as an adult. The events leading up to this moment, what cinemas calls the backstory, are exceptional dramatic. But they only explain the occasion, not the painting, and in re-entering my early responses to it, I have tried instead to get to the heart of this startling switch that a self-portrait can effect, putting you on the spot in the artist's position through their involving intensity of look. You are as he was, contemplating himself. You see him through his own eyes. Growing up, I realized how this resonates with our own experience all the time. The way we consult the mirror to question our appearance, rearrange our looks. The other self-portrait was not intimate at all. Durer's painting of himself in 1500, the midpoint of the millennium, so airy in its glacial charisma. It looked too modern to have been painted so long ago, a classic reaction to high illusion among children, too alive to be trapped behind ancient glazes and varnish. Although I was quite frightened by the picture, it made me aware for the first time that the people in pictures could seem as exciting as people in real life. Much later, a German school friend sent me a postcard of the self-portrait, writing on the reverse that she had quite a crush for Durer. My art teacher strongly disapproved when I showed it to him, probably suspecting my interest in the face, certainly doubting its status as an image. There is too much of the artist, he declared in the picture. But both his words and hers strike the defining aspect of self-portraiture, and of this self-portraiture in particular, which is the fusion of a person with picture. With all portraits, no matter how mediocre the image, how brief the faltering its illusion, there is always the sense of coming face to face with another person before that person reverts to an image. Self-portraits go further in claiming the two to be one and the same. A person and a picture all in one, the artist as a masterpiece, faced with the self-portraits of Durer, Rembrandt, David Dickinson's opposition between man and the work falls apart. And it is in the oscillation between the two that one perceives the mind at work. For whatever the show of the after-person, self-portraits speak of the inner self too, in the character and choice of depiction. Sitters in portraits may assume their own pose, expression, clothes, and so forth, although it is remarkable how often artists, especially portraitists like Sargent, control the whole show right down to the wardrobe and hair. Self-portraits do all this and more, true to their own desires about how to picture themselves from within and without, both in and as works of art. I take these truths to be significant, and I'm struck by the reticence of Poussin, fastidiously withdrawing into an enclosure of his own paintings. Almost abstract of his art, by the unstoppable ego of a Colbert trying to thrust his way after the space of the picture, by Rosa with his glowering mountain man pose looming above the tablet engraved with the injunction to keep quiet if you have nothing better to say. The solemnity of both the words and the image half mocked by the melodramatic pose. Rosa speaks loudly, no matter that he is affecting to keep silent. Self-portraiture is rarely the singular, interned art described by Julian Bell in his classic 500 Self-Portraiture. However introspective its reputation, not even David is talking to only himself, as it seems to me. One Munich painting, Self-Portrait in Hell, in which he appears up to his waist in sculpture, in sulphurous paint. He wasn't simply describing the lonely anguish of being abandoned by a lover who had brought him so much grief, the artist had turned a gun to himself, strategically missing everything but the tip of a finger. He was issuing a public accusation specifically for display in an Oslo gallery where anyone, including the press, could see it. Self-portraiture is an opportunity to put across one side of the story, and it has been exploited at times as a love letter, mission statement, or suicide note by other means. It's a special look, so sharp, so expectant, shifts straight into the first-person address, and self-portraiture has its own counterparts in speech. Soliloquies, monologues, laments, as well as the written word in the form of prologues, sonnets, memoirs. But the directness of a potential intimacy of a speech come with a peculiar dilemmas and anomalies. Should the self-portrait portrayer show him or herself in the act of painting, true to the moment of creation, or doing something completely different that might appear more impressive but less plausible? And if a painting, should the picture in view be this one or another? And if this one, what about the paradox of timing? I show myself in the middle of a painting, but my picture is obviously finished. The supposedly direct relation between mirror and canvas is confusing and even compromised. Who is this in the mirror, myself or another? I or he? And when painted, has this self become someone independent of me? Some artists, for instance, Sargent, in an image so devoid of inner expressivism, meant as well as being a portrait, or Titian in a magnificent self-portrait in which he is looking away and clearly impatient to be gone, justify their presence by appearing as far as possible in the alibi of the third person. And why do artists choose to show themselves in the first place, exposing themselves and their art to the accusation of narcissism so often raised by critics who seem to confuse self-representation with self-regard? Historically, there had never been much money or glory in it. Self-portraits, unlike portraits, are rarely commissioned or appraised as the high point of an artist's career. Although well over 1,000 have been painted especially for the Vasari self-portrait corridor of the Uffizi since the 17th century, honor, incidentally, that appears to stifle creativity even among some highly original painters. But self-portraits are often called for more important ways: a gift for a friend, a wedding present, and the embodiment of a reproachfulness, appreciation or love. Goya painted himself in the arm of a doctor who saved him from dying in gratitude for his life. Murillo painted a self-portrait at his children's request that would live with them in all its touching benevolence. Literally, the picture turns upon the tangible moment of his fingers after the artist's death. Self-portraits make artists present in the embodiment of their art. It sounds so neat and succinct, but they often do so only to ask who or what this person is, who is looking back from the mirror, how dismaying it is to be alone, how hard it is to represent or even just to be oneself in the wide world of mankind. I only know for certain the exact circumstances in which one such self-portrait was made, but my sense is that something in the artist's experience may speak to a universal truth. She was my mother, Elizabeth Cumming, studying painting in Edinburgh College of Art not long after the Second World War, and surrounded by men who fought that war, many of them still in uniform at the easel. Compared to these heroes who had seen and changed the world, she felt she knew about nothing more significant than herself. College days were spent painting the external world of which she had such a powerless grasp. But one night, when everyone else had gone home, she took a canvas into a studio and made a rapid self-portrait in secret. There was more conviction in that image, she said, than all the heaped apples and the male nudes she ever painted. My mother had made herself real momentarily to herself. She would be horrified to think that a painting kept hidden ever since should be mentioned in the same page as Velázquez. But they have nothing in common. Self-portraits stand in the same relation to each other as human beings, possess a self, members of the same infinitely various race. I don't say that this puts them beyond criticism, far from it. But if this book has the slightest hint of a unifying theory of self-portraiture, it is that the behavior of people in self-portraiture has a strange tendency to reflect the behavior of people in life. One might say this of portraits too, but it is not so easy to think of an example of a portrait in which the sitter tears at his face, pulls out his hair, looms up at the mirror in disbelief, or recoils quite openly from it. Still less where the sitter is doing something bad. Now, do many portraits express what it's like to live deep inside the mind of the sitter? Rembrandt's depth of knowledge is not an illusion. Van Gogh's mind teems. Velázquez senses the bravery of our lives day in the sun as a few other painters in art. This is a book of inquiry as well as praise. It examines how and what self-portraitures communicate and why they come to look as they do. And it considers something else that unites us, the representation of ourselves, in terms of artist self-portraits. We all have a half and public existence, however limited, and it is the daily requirement that we put together some sort of face to the world. The thought of having to create a definitive face for all time, though, might make even the extrovert falter, and there are chapters here on stage, fright amid and a serial self-portraiture in which artists have themselves another modifying dance. On the other hand, the opportunity to put oneself across as completely as one cannot in life, as a rehearsed address instead of a off-the-cuff ramble, has its obvious appeal. The most poignant self-portrait I know is the little picture by Karazi, reproduced at the end of this book, where the artist makes his address even while wondering whether any of his attempts to communicate will ever succeed. Art historians do not concern themselves much with the power of art to move, disturb, despair, indeed to affect the emotions of the viewer. Yet it is hard to think of many artists, even in the last century, whose own concerns and ambitions are exclusively formal. Self-portraiture offers perfect instances of the dichotomy. Historians sometimes treat it as a remote and insignificant twig of the far greater branch of portraiture, finding in self-portraiture a twig, a profession's collective representation of itself, a way of assigning more works, signaling skill, exemplifying style. Where there's no written evidence concerning a self-portrait, they prefer to avoid remarking on its human content. But I cannot believe self-portraiters are never thinking of themselves and their lives. All these self-portraits have no objective or personal significance, that they are not in some profound sense of a fragment of a moment's self. I cannot see Rembrandt's self-portrait solely in terms of the art market in 17th century Holland any more than I can look at Duer's 1,500-year self-portrait, even after historians have tried to put out its fire with theologian explanation and not be amazed. These self-portraits have incalculable mystery as part of their content. A history of self-portraiture may one day be written, though such a work would have to concede that there is no straight path in any case, that self-portraiture is a sense of fits and starts, cul-de-sacs, detours, and strange digressions. Still, these separate essays are approximately chronological and linked, one to the next, as a narrative with its own story. Most of the self-portraits discussed art painting. No prejudice is intended toward video or sculpture, although sculptured self-portraits are comparatively rare. It is simply that painting have fascinated me more. Many of them feel Dickens' ideal of the lasting monument are among the artist's greatest works, if not the greatest of all. Others struggle with the multiple personalities of a bogus imagines must have afflicted Shakespeare. Peculiarly testing its demands upon the artist, who has to hit upon some form of self to represent, peculiarly rich in the self-portrait knowledge on which it can call. Self-portraiture draws forth some of the most profound and advanced picture-making art. It turns the subject inside out and then remakes him or her as an individual trinity. There is the work of art, the image of the maker, and the truth of what he or she sensed, imagined, or believed. Another themselves and how they choose, as well must choose, to present the self. Okay, that's the preface. It's long. I stop here.